the kind of dirty secret of a lot of brands is that cash flow, even when things are profitable, is often a problem.
Do your research to find a 3PL that's nichely focused on your product dimensions. And so you need to say, hey, what's more important to you? Is it like a minimum volume commitment? Is it how quickly I pay you? What is most important to you? Because it's not always intuitive. All right, Dylan, we're back. Episode 24. What's happening, dude?
Not much. I'm excited to talk about trying to expand and improve margins. Who doesn't like talking about that, Jon? It's a fun one.
Dude,
it's an important one.
Hat. I should get this one. This is finance, but I should get one that says margins or something like that.
There you go. There you go. Or like land and costs. I mean, something that
is that cost variable? Question mark. Anyways, let's get into it, man. Where do you want to start?
Yeah. So I mean, like, I think that everyone is always trying to assess like where is the lowest hanging fruit opportunity to improve their variable costs and improve variable margin in turn. And I think that there's a couple like simple low hanging fruit ones that are sometimes easy. But there's some other ones that are more outside of the box. So we'd be curious to kind of like get your perspective on maybe some of the ones that are like less common that you've seen be really, really high leverage that maybe some people aren't considering. And then we kind of just go down the list of examples that I've seen, examples that you've seen, and go from there.
Awesome, man. Well, before you grill me on this and see if I even know what I'm talking about when it comes to margin improvement, I better, right? Because I'm a CFO. But what would you say on the marketing side of the world? What is the most common one that you guys, I don't want to say necessarily get involved in, like you may not actively be trying to improve it, but like what's the most frequent suggestions of buckets that you're giving brands to think about opening up margin points?
Okay, there's two. One is, am I trying to improve AOV? And usually if I'm trying to improve AOV, the reason is that there's some marginal gain in shipping more per order, so that your dollar value of AOV goes up faster than your shipping costs go up. Well, a prime example of this is like clothing and apparel, light and small. You can often fit more stuff in a similar cost package, and you just get much more. You get a sizable improvement in your variable margin when you buy more, save more. So that's like one conversation we'll often have is like, okay, we want better profit margins, we want better returns on our ad spend or into inventory. Is there anything that can be easily adjusted just on shipping by improving basket size? The flip side of that, and I often don't think of ad spend as a variable cost, but it is. I think of that as like a separate kind of section, a separate line. But for super high LTV brands, when ad spend as a variable cost is too high, sometimes one of the ways to improve it is to actually drive down AOV to basically get more people trying the product if LTV is high enough. And you can actually improve your CAC to LTV dynamics in some cases by driving down AOV and reducing, which is often one of the very biggest variable costs, which is your ad spend. Those are kind of the two most frequent kind of schools of thought we'll go down in terms of offer for this. I think the first one has more to do with like what I would consider your more traditional variable costs, which are your landed costs, your logistics fees, so shipping fees, and then your payment gateway costs. And usually, payment gateway costs kind of are what they are for the most part. It's going after your landed costs and then your shipping. I think a lot of it comes down to shipping a lot of the time. It's just this kind of like boring, not fun thing to talk about that often gets overlooked.
Okay, I actually have a question. I just thought of this and I had to write it down so I didn't forget it. I'm really curious about this because I've actually, this has come out numerous times. In your experience, I'm sure the answer is it depends, but I just still would love maybe a couple examples or something. Like if you're working with a brand to increase items per order and thus increase AOV, do you see CAC go up? Like because you're having to get someone to convert on like a bigger order size, or is it common to be able to figure that out and not meaningfully mess with CAC? Because really what I'm thinking about is like you're going to decrease your shipping cost per unit, right? Or shipping cost per order relative to revenue. But does CAC ever go up and offset that because you're trying to get people to spend more money?
Yeah, CAC almost always goes up. It's rare that CAC doesn't go up to some degree. I mean, like, there's a few instances where it wouldn't. So, like, for example, a post-purchase upsell. If you have no post-purchase upsell, you should probably have a post-purchase upsell. It's like the closest thing to free money. And because it happens after the initial purchase event, there's no friction added.
Mm,
And some percentage of customers may take it.
got it.
Oftentimes, strategies that increase AOV increase some amount of friction. Usually, it's pretty minimal. So, like for example, like maybe you're having like a buy more, save out cart drawer where you're incentivizing people to basically add more stuff when they have their when they're in the cart function of the checkout process. You're presenting someone with another option, so it slows down the purchase. So but I'd argue that friction is quite minimal. So basically, the more friction you add to the experience in the effort to boost AOV, the higher the likelihood is that your CAC will go up. So the order of operations
Yeah.
is what is the least friction, what's the smallest amount of friction I can apply to the pre-existing funnel to get AOV up, so that CAC ideally doesn't go up. And then the other part of it too is just like there's different consumers with different willingness to spend. And sometimes as you try to increase AOV, you're just pricing out some people, which can have negative drawbacks too. So that's why having like a variety of offers so that someone can buy it $50, $100, and $150 arbitrarily based off of what their discretionary income allows for or their willingness to buy. But that's kind of my best answer at that.
No, those are good points. Those are really good points, and I think super helpful. I think the bottom line is what I'm kind of telling the audience is like, hey, when you're looking at something like trying to raise AOV, which is, just do a little bit of thinking. You're not gonna be able to predict it perfectly, like what is it gonna do to CAC, but like do a little bit of thinking and measuring about to what does happen to CAC and make sure that like it's still net with your shipping costs going down as a percentage of revenue doesn't like offset it. So
Yeah.
um cool, man. Well, I'm curious, what if you have a brand that comes to you guys, or like actually here, I'll pose a scenario that I'm sure has happened before. You're working with a brand and you're like, hey, you really should like if we could open up a few margin points, it would really give us some room to do X, Y, and Z on the marketing side of the world. Is there How do you guys think about high LTV brands versus new customer dominant brands in terms of like the impact or need to open up margin points versus like it's not as important?
I mean, I think on like first time customer dominant brands, like the need to open up margin points is just more important because you have less levers you can pull to try to improve it. So I think they matter for both. Like you can add margin dollars via new or return customers. So they're like both very, very important. But you could probably with you there's probably more flexibility for a lack of initiative to improve margins in a high LTV business. But that's a pretty like general statement. But I'd say like largely it is true. But both, I think all businesses should be looking at their various variable cost lines and always thinking about how can I do this cheaper? Whether it's like on the cog side, like at some point, do I become vertically integrated? Oftentimes the answer to that is still maybe no, but like maybe that's one way to get it to be cheaper. And
For sure.
maybe I can't do that today because it's still cheaper for me to use a co-packer or to manufacture overseas or manufacture with this person. But at a certain volume, I can actually maybe enter the arena and possibly get better. On shipping, how can I adjust my packaging? How can I adjust who I'm shipping with or where I'm shipping from? So I think that I think a good I think one of the on the last pod we were talking about constraints, and I would look
Mhm.
at like on maybe it's a quarterly basis, all of the different levers that I can possibly pull to improve my variable margins, and all the subcategories of the major variable cost lines, and just be like, at what point do I reach a size, or what needs to be true for me to basically start doing this differently? When do I
Yeah.
go to the West Coast warehouse, the Central warehouse, and the East Coast warehouse? When do I go to this type of packaging because it's cheaper? And then that's how you continuously, ideally, drive down costs over time, in my opinion.
Well, I just thought of something while you were talking right now, which is that like I think step one in deciding if you should try to optimize your variable costs in any given area or any given line of the P&L is to decide if you actually have a problem or not, right? And I'm sure you guys, I just imagine you guys see this because of the forecasting you guys do, and you get the variable costs. You get the unit economics from a brand. One of the things that we see right away, because we work with so many different ecom brands, like I'll use apparel as an example. I was actually looking at an apparel brand that we might start working with. I was doing their free CFO audit. And I was like, I am surprised at how high their shipping cost is as a percentage of revenue, because I can think of several other apparel brands that we work with, similar size products, similar AOV, similar similar volume, similar in many ways, and like this is significantly higher. And so I think the point I want to make is that like when one of the benefits of working with an agency, either you guys or us, is like we can benchmark things really quickly because we see other brands' P&Ls day in and day out. And so like step one is like, do I have a problem? And so a lot of times where we start is we go, hey, we analyzed your P&L for the first time, and this line item is like way out of whack with other similar brands that we work with that we would consider to be a solid benchmark. And that usually indicates, generally speaking, and then I'm sure we'll get into some more tactics in a second, like specific tactics. But if we see a lot of other brands that have been able to achieve a certain cost as a percentage of revenue, a variable cost as a percentage of revenue, and you're way out of whack, I've found in my experience that that's probably more low-hanging fruit. Like you're probably just doing something like differently. You don't know what you don't know. And a simple change or negotiation may get you to the average. I think we're getting to the average in your specific benchmark, your product category, whatever, is not that hard. It's when you want to start whittling away to get better than average that you've got to start to get really strategic. And we can go through like both the what gets you to average and what gets you better than average
Yeah,
today.
I totally agree, and I think going through each item will be good. I think one thing you said on a pod, I don't even remember what pod this was, it was a while ago, but it kind of changed how I think about things a little bit. And you basically said that we were talking about negotiating product cost, and do you want to go and negotiate on price or on terms? And I think that like so much of the DTC or ecom or whatever uh, target setting is built around the P&L, and that's
Mm-hmm.
a good thing to think about. But the kind of dirty secret of a lot of brands is that cash flow, even when things are profitable, is often a problem. I like more often than not, you can make an argument, or maybe not more often than not, but like very often you can make an argument that your biggest concern is how do you improve cash flow, and oftentimes that means going to some of these solutions or solutions, going to some of these costs or line items and basically trying to negotiate better terms. I think terms get overlooked a lot. Like
Yeah,
if your main objective is, hey, I'm not making enough money that I can pull out of my business, well, maybe the answer is you need to get more profitable. The other answer is you're perfectly profitable. You just can't pull out a sizable chunk of the profits because the way in which your terms are set up are not optimized for that. So
totally.
I just want to call that caveat out, as I think sometimes I've often overthought about P&L, 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 and there's a time and a place, but also cash flow is a whole other beast.
Well, yeah, okay. So let's talk about product cost a little bit, like optimizing your
Yeah.
landed product cost, because that was a nice segue to that. And like I think step one is deciding, should your focus be the variable cost reduction, or should it be payment terms, or should it be a mixture of the two? And I think it's really important to think about this going in, because and you can do some very simple forecasts, but this is where a CFO can help you think through the impact on all three financial statements of a given decision and not just be one statement focused, right? And oftentimes it's P&L because that's the one that's most intuitive. But there's a brand that I've been the CFO for about a year and a half, and their purchasing guy, who's a ruthless negotiator, he used to hit me up before he did his annual like contract negotiation, and he would be like, "Hey, Jon, is it better for me to get um a like 1% reduction in cost, or to to go from 30-day terms to 60-day terms. And so I helped him go through a little bit of math of like, okay, how much do we expect to purchase this year? This dollar amount. Okay, that 1% of that is this number over a 12-month period. Now let's go look at our average purchases by month to them. And let's look and see if they financed one additional month, right? How much cash would that put back in the bank on average on a monthly basis? And there are times like in the season for this particular brand, we went with the cash flow route because we needed to preserve cash flow. That's what we need to do. We need to open up cash flow. And so we're willing to, like, an example could be, I'm willing to give up $25K a month in P&L improvement for $50K on average of additional cash balance because that vendor is financing that much more of our purchases. And so first you need to decide if you should negotiate one versus the other. Then the other thing is to just start thinking about like, I mean, dude, so much of product cost negotiation is understanding how your supplier is, what their constraints are, what their concerns are. It's really not a very technical discussion. It's a very relationship driven discussion.
Yeah.
Right. And it's saying like asking questions like, and here's the key to negotiating, man. I mean, if you've read any books on negotiating, you know, like the person who asks more questions is in command. Right. And so you need to go in and say, hey, what's more important to you? Is it like a minimum volume commitment? Is it how quickly I pay you? Like, what is most important to you? Because it's not always intuitive. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, right? Sometimes it's more cash flow for them and they're willing to drop the price but keep cash flow. Sometimes it's the other way around. And so you should really ask questions. But some of the levers are like, hey, give me this price reduction and I'll give you a volume commitment, right? Or, hey, give me this price reduction and I'll if they push back, I'll ease up on the payment terms on my end a little bit because I've determined that I can afford to do that. So I think have all of those things available to you. And then the other thing is, you know, have more than one option. Like he who has one option has no leverage. Like go get other quotes, even if you don't ever like expect to use that factory. Go, and I think you got to test the market at least once a year of just like, hey, you got to keep your suppliers honest, right? And you'd be surprised that when you tell a factory that you're shopping the market, or actually like if you're dealing in like China or some of these other countries, when you start shopping the market, word gets back to that factory. Every time we did that Guardian, like, hey, we heard that you were talking to these guys. And like, so you know, have options, use volume commitments, use payment terms, and just figure out what's important to the factory. I think those are some of the most important things for like unit product cost negotiations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that like the diversification thing is like super important, especially in a world of tariffs and or just like heavy reliance on one place. Like natural disasters, like these are like very unlikely terrible things that could happen, but I think you have to have a plan because there's a lot of businesses that if their one and only current supplier doesn't work anymore, like you literally your business is done. Like good luck moving some of these supply chains overnight. So it's easier said than done for sure. Like sitting in like the marketing seat, like the logistics of some of the back ends for making some of these products is actually very, very difficult. And there's some places in the world where it's like this is kind of the only place you can go to get it made this way. So there are some serious kind of bottlenecks that can occur. But I think that like pushing for diversification is heavily important. And it's also another cost benefit analysis for like you may go to a different country and pay 5% more, but would you rather that, but then have some diversification? So you're not only getting your stuff from one place, and it's like, well, that is up to you to decide. I would view that as like insurance. It's like you can sleep a little better at night because push comes to shove. You know, this other factory can at least output X, Y, Z amounts. So I think that's a good call out for sure. On the shipping side, have you had any like major breakthroughs where you're like, wow, I just like completely changed the economics of a business by optimizing something on the shipping side? Or what are some of the biggest breakthroughs or things that you think people miss?
Okay, so let's talk first about inbound shipping. Um, the obvious, I'll start with obvious and kind of go to maybe less obvious, but like one, check with multiple freight forwarders, right? Get competitive quotes. They're gonna be dealing with spot quotes a lot of times on the open spot market. So like it's not like you're going to get a better container price, but look for things like, hey, is there a better method to choose? So for example, like we found at one point in time at Guardian Bikes, it was better counterintuitively our East Coast warehouse, instead of bringing stuff to Savannah, Georgia and trucking it from there up to Tennessee, it was actually cheaper for this period of time to bring it into the port of Los Angeles and put it on a train and have it go via train all the way to Tennessee. You have to be asking about route optimization every time you book a container. Like, hey, what's the latest like options? Because these change all the time. The rates change all the time. The capacity changes all the time. But if you stay on top of this, instead of just setting and forgetting and saying, we always sea freight to the port of LA and then truck from there to final mile, like you need to always be checking these things because you can actually find a good amount of money on like, I'll call it freight method and route optimization. The other one that's top of mind right now is HTS code engineering. And like, for example, we have a friend, Izzy Rosenzweig. He runs a company called Portless. He has brought up numerous examples in his content of like someone made a small change to the product that did not change the user experience at all, but it allowed them to use a different HTS code that was a much lower tariff rate. So like if you have a lot of volume you're doing, it can be worth it to hire an expert. There's consultants you can hire to like search through the HTS code library and give you thoughts on what you should be using or opportunities to optimize that. So don't forget about these things like inbound logistics, route optimization, and HTS code optimization. On the outbound shipping side, I'm gonna go straight to like less frequently maybe used tactics. Um, Packaging design. Like I think that the reason why a lot of brands don't do this enough is because it is kind of a heavy lift, or it feels daunting, right? But let me be clear about what I say when I say package redesign. It's zeroing in on optimizing your the dimensional weight of your product to get the costs down. We spent years on this at Guardian Bikes, literally years. In our own warehouse, like where we're like messing around with like how could we literally like we found these certain thresholds where it's like if we could pull this back like 1.5 inches and this a quarter of an inch and that like how much it would save us. And so it is a little bit of a daunting task, but if you can save a few bucks per shipment and then you extrapolate that across all the volume you do, there's not a lot of things that you can do that will save you a few bucks per order. And I have definitely seen this work. You just got to be willing
100%.
to put in the work.
I still find I still find the Guardian bike stories you share always so interesting because I'm like, yeah, like that definitely fills in the bucket of like hard to do D2C and for anything big. I think
Yeah,
package
totally.
or like definitely like you have to like without it like without that maybe that business wouldn't have even worked D2C, right? So it's like
No, not at
it's
all.
yeah.
I would say another thing to really consider so let's talk about supply chain network, or sorry, fulfillment center load balancing, meaning
Yeah.
what SKUs do you put where in the country, right? I think there's the obvious, or at least I think this is more obvious. What SKUs do you put in what warehouse to get closer to the end customer? But I think there's a sneaky, like, real challenging problem that if you can figure this out, it can really unlock a lot more margin for you is if you get multiple products purchased, how do you make sure that you don't ever ship from two different locations to get the same order fulfilled, right? That is definitely a more nuanced, data-driven challenge, right? But if you start having multiple, if you're a brand that it's not uncommon to have multiple different SKUs that are purchased at any given point in time, and you don't have them, you have you have stuff coming from different sides of the country, different packages, different warehouses, same order, that can really, really kill your margins. But I would say probably the biggest thing that brands can do that I don't know how counterintuitive it is or how much they focus on this or not, but it's key, and this can save you a lot of money. Do your research to find a 3PL that specializes, that's nichely focused on your product dimensions, either your dimensional weight or your actual like physical weight of your product. This was a huge unlock for us at Guardian. We found a 3PL that's specifically focused on oversized, large items direct to consumer. So what did that mean? They had an overabundance of volume in that package category. So they went back to UPS and FedEx and said, hey, we're going to give you all this big size volume, which is good money for you guys, but you need to give us a discount on all of the surcharges for, they're called AHS, additional handling surcharges. You need to give us the dimensional weight surcharges and the heavy item surcharge discounts. And what they did is they didn't just pocket that, they passed that along, or at least a lot of it along to the customer, so that they could attract a bunch of brands that specifically ship
That's
big
awesome.
products. We go to other, places that focused on like small products, and they could not touch those rates. So that's a huge unlock if you can figure that out.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I never obviously there's like the packaging optimization and what goes into it to optimize for the end shipping cost. But the 3PLs themselves, obviously you're always competing on price, but going and thinking about how certain 3PLs may be more specifically optimized for a package of your size. Yeah, that makes complete sense. I hadn't thought of that before.
I will say too, like, I know we have this recurring theme on Ecom Scaling Show of like, what's the game for a high LTV brand? What's the game for a new customer dominant brand? I will say that I have a belief that if you have a high LTV brand, let's say like that's a subscription product, that can make strategically placing your inventory in different warehouses easier, because you can use your
100%.
subscription data to say, this is where I'm going to need to fill subscription like refills, right? Whereas if you're new customer dominant, it's harder to draw the regional trends data together to decide where to place stuff. So that's something to think about too.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Um I guess when it comes to other lines, I think we've covered most of them. So obviously there's the landed costs, there's the inbound shipping. You just gave an outbound shipping example. Are there any other major outbound shipping examples that you can think of? I mean, one that comes to mind for me is just like how many items you put in each order.
Yeah.
Like how did that impact dimensional space and then the cost you incur? Are there any other ones that maybe I'm not thinking of?
I guess the only other tip I'll give, like when it comes to negotiating with 3PLs, this is something that we did very successfully at Guardian Bikes, was like, don't let the 3PL only give you quotes based on your like historical data, like let's say the last 12 months. Sell them on the trend. Sell them on where it's going. Um, I was able to get us the 3PL that we moved to at one point in our story. They have bands, volume bands, and like there's specific predetermined discounts at different volume bands. We were at historically a given volume band, but I was able to pull data monthly and show them how every month it was going up, volume was going up. And I was like, listen, next month we're going to be in the next band. Like, we're not a static. I understand putting us in this band if we're not growing, but let me show you the last 24 months. And so I was able to sell them on giving us the pricing at the band we were about to enter, not the band that we were currently in. So just remember, like, they're a business too. Same thing with your product costs or your product suppliers. You need to show them the story. You need to show them the data. They're not going to look at your data and necessarily see the growth the same way. Be ready to pitch them like you're pitching an investor, or like any other big partnership, because at the end of the day, they are a big partner. And we used to also make sure that we checked in with them regularly and showed them. I actually came up with a deck format for our 3PL that we were showing them every single quarter. And it's because we're just one of their clients. We wanted to make sure they saw where we were going. And yes, I was also planting seeds for future negotiations that I was going to come to and ask them for different, optimized terms. But make sure you sell them on where you're going. Don't let them price things based on where you've come from.
That makes complete sense. And I guess last question on my side is like, at what point do you think vertical integration is like? I know it's a big one, but like
Yeah.
that's one of the big ones, one of the biggest levers you can pull. Are there any like
Yep.
rough rules of thumb for that?
Probably bigger than you think. Now I would say analyze it, right? And at the end of the day, it's an investment. You're placing a bet because you can build out all the spreadsheet assumptions you want, right? But the decision is usually predicated on the fact that like some sort of sustained continuous growth is what's going to pay that investment back. And so I think you need to just be really mindful of like the risk in placing that bet and being wrong, because you're going to have a fixed outlay up front, right? Several of them, and a lot of effort to get it going. And it's going to pay itself back over the course of years, not over the course of months. And so just understand the risk. If it works, it can be massive. Now, I know I always use Guardian as an example. We analyze this annually for many, many years. Just recently has Guardian like actually started to fulfill themselves, right? And so it ended up being much later than we thought was financially viable. But I will say also too, don't just build a model and assess the risk of it financially. Do thorough research on what you're going to have to operationally become competent at, because it will be running a warehouse, staffing a warehouse, having a WMS and an IMS. Like it's a completely different game. So I highly recommend, this is one thing that I think that Guardian did well. They hired an expert on the executive team when they pulled the trigger on that, because they're like, this is not our core competency. So we're going to bring someone in who has decades of this experience and build the systems and build the team. So do not discount that, because it's too easy to just look at a spreadsheet and go like, man, these numbers look good, and not think about operationally what you have to do to make that come to fruition.
Yeah, the operational mental distraction drag. That makes sense. Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from all this is just like, I think that there's lots of if statements or like scenarios in which I think you can go back to the table to either negotiate and or explore different options for some of these variable costs. And I think that it's good. Part of the reason why it's important to have a forecast is it can kind of give you an idea of when you revisit some of these things on a quarterly basis or whatever time frame makes sense. It allows you to kind of know at this size, I'm going to want to then go and change this or negotiate this or re-explore that. And I think that allows you to kind of set the timelines for when they should be considered. I think you just use the words like on an annual basis, you are reviewing the potential of vertically integrating some of the workflows. I think that type of analysis should be done for basically every variable cost you have to try and always get either the best price or the best terms.
Agreed. Yeah. I think my final takeaway to build on that is just like, this is a continuous process. It's not one and done.
Yeah.
And really great. If you look at massive businesses that have achieved huge economies of scale, it's because they've done this for decades, right? And they just do it again and again and again and again and again and again. But just always realize, say as a final thought, you can't like coerce your vendors into this. It has to be a win-win. If you become known as coercing them and just throwing your weight around, they eventually don't want to work with you anymore. So as you're doing this continuously, look at what you can give to get what you need. And if you do that again and again and again, you're going to create this virtuous cycle and you're going to see your margins go up, over time. So
Totally.
awesome, man. Well, that was a wrap. Episode 24 in the bag. Ready for the next one.
Almost 25.